I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds, and welcome to my horror house, and welcome to my top 5 horror remakes that aren't The Fly or The Thing. I'm leaving them off the table because it's generally accepted that they are phenomenal remakes. They're exemplars of remakes done right. Plus, if I'd have gone from 5 to 10, I'd have just chucked them back in, and then my 10 would have been made up with some films from my honourable mentions, and it wouldn't have generated as much discussion. If I shrink it down to 5, I really have to think about it, and this top 5 is very personal to me, so there will be movies in this that you disagree with. There will be omissions that you think would be in yours. That is where you jump into the comment section below and tell me everything I've got wrong. But for me, kicking off at number 5, and my most personal entry, is The Hills Have Eyes from 2006. I have seen this film once. Films that are a little bit, how shall I put it, a little bit rapey aren't to my personal taste. So, for example, I haven't seen the remake of I Spit on Your Grave because I don't tend towards that. But back in 2006, when this movie was released, I was going through something of a personal trauma. My partner of 9 years at the time had just left me, and I'd found out that she'd been seeing someone else, and it was the full-on cliche Dear John letter left for me to find at home, and my world had sort of completely turned upside down. I was in that phase where I was reeling. I was kind of living minute to minute in a sort of state of mild shock, and for the 100 odd minutes, 2 hours that this movie played, it was just like someone slapping me round the face for a couple of hours with some of the most horrendous shit. And it was so full on and so brutal that it was a holiday away from my life, and I know you horror fans will understand this. People who don't get or like horror movies kind of don't understand how horror fans can watch horror movies to relax or to be entertained and the like, but I know you guys will understand what I mean when I say that I found the experience, as brutal as the film was, that brutality was therapeutic for me because it got me out of my head. Number 4 for me, from 1988, is the remake of The Blob. I don't understand why The Blob is not talked about in the same terms as The Thing or The Fly. Maybe it's because those two remakes have a cerebral element that isn't in The Blob, but it's another example of a filmmaker in the 80s taking a formative film from their childhood in the 50s and remaking it for a modern audience. And yeah, it's a little more tongue-in-cheek for the modern audience. It's a little more metatextual for this modern audience. But weirdly, now that more time has passed between the remake of The Blob and now than between the original and when it was remade, it itself is a sort of fly trapped in amber of back before CG effects and all practical. It's a glorious full-on movie. It is absolutely made for the right reasons. I loved the original. Filmmaking techniques are different now, and this is my love letter to The Blob for a new generation, and I think it plays like absolute gangbusters. My number 3 spot goes to, I think it's probably the most recent movie on the list, 2013, The Evil Dead. When a remake of The Evil Dead was announced, there were a lot of raised eyebrows, and one of them was mine. Why would you need to remake The Evil Dead? I mean, it's such a very specific and particular film from a very specific and particular filmmaker. What on earth can you bring to the table? Of course, by that point, Evil Dead in our imaginations wasn't just that original video nasty, but had morphed into a sort of slapsticky horror comedy Bruce Campbell vehicle. Subsequent to the remake, we've got even more. We've got the Ash versus Evil Dead TV series. So hours and hours and hours and hours now of Evil Dead material that I think this particular entry into that has carved its own place out. Gone is sort of the slapsticky stuff, and it's more full bore nastiness. It's a nasty, grimy movie that clearly adores the movie that it's come from. It's not Fede Alvarez coming in saying, I think I can remake Evil Dead better by any stretch of the imagination. And I think the reverence he holds for Sam Raimi's movie sort of calmed a lot of people down when they finally saw it and finally saw, okay, this is sort of how it fits into the Evil Dead landscape, and cool, do you know what, this is pretty fucking full throttle and I dig it. And I do dig it. Number 2 is the oldest movie on the list, from 1978, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Another example of taking a movie from the 50s and updating it. And again, this is more of a cerebral approach to an update, but it's taking the framework of the original movie and mapping on completely new themes to it. It's not the Reds under the bed's Cold War menace anymore. And my God, what a cast you've got. I mean, Donald Sutherland, Leonard Nimoy, a young Jeff Goldblum, many, many more that I'm forgetting. And that ending, I mean, the movie was out in 1978. That is 40 plus years ago now, and it has now become a meme, just that still. I'm sure there are tons and tons of people who know the image and haven't seen the movie that it comes from. This is how you do an update, a remake properly, and it's scary. Before I get to my number 1 spot, some honourable mentions. Of course, The Fly. Of course, John Carpenter's The Thing. I took them off because they so obviously belong on the list that I wanted to give myself a bit more of a mental exercise. If those 2 aren't available to you, what else would you choose? But I can't just stroll past them without tipping my hat and saying they're both in their own right phenomenal movies. I also kind of dig Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake. I don't think that's too controversial. I don't like that guy's movie making, but he seemed to hit on something with the Dawn of the Dead remake. Cat People. How can 2 movies be so completely different? You've got the Val Lewton original Cat People, which is mwah, and the insane remake, which one of my exes, I was talking to her about it. Have you seen this film where blah, 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 blah? And she goes, oh, the Sex Panthers. So now in my head, the Cat People remake is called The Sex Panthers. I really struggled whether to put Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 into my top 5 because I do really like it. I've talked about it elsewhere on this channel. I've done a video defending Rob Zombie's Halloween and Halloween 2. I just think pound for pound, the original Halloween 2 is a fairly drab, lifeless, pretty boring affair. The only thing it really has going for it is it literally starts where the last movie ended and carries on the tale of the night that he came home. And I like that little hook. But Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, it just does more interesting things. We get into some of the weird headspace of this Michael Myers, and it's the most crazy and out there stuff that anyone's ever attempted to do with Michael Myers beyond the bonkers Cult of Thorn stuff. And I appreciate it for itself. It's a brutal, nasty movie. I appreciate it for what it tries to do, whether it succeeds or not. But it didn't make the top 5. And my number 1 best horror remake of all time is probably the most audacious remake. It's from 1979. It's from Werner Herzog. The cojones you have to remake F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu. Where do you get the balls to even attempt it, let alone produce another Nosferatu that is, from start to finish, practically freaking perfect? A movie which intentionally links back to a cinematic past from a countryman of his that he thought that was being forgotten. So at essentially the height of his powers, he decided, no, I need us to plug back into our cinematic history. And he pulls it off, and it's a minor cinematic miracle. It only elevates Murnau's Nosferatu, which I find almost impossible to comprehend. How you can make a remake which, in its own right, is a practically perfect film. I have nothing but great things to say about it, but is also aware of the tradition it comes from, and also succeeds in elevating the source material and honouring it at the same time. The mind fair boggles, ladies and gentlemen. What have I missed off? What horror remakes do you really like? Which of mine do you think are spot on? Which of mine would you cut from the list? Please get involved. And as I say, if there are any other top 5 subjects you think would be fun to tackle and, most importantly, start a conversation, feel absolutely free to suggest them. Next week, we'll get back to the movies and the Legion cut of Exorcist 3.